Kia ora, Assalamu alaikum, Bula, welcome, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all, Gary and the Migrant Careers Support Trust. An interesting thing that happened was as I was driving here from my last appointment, I pretty much went through every important milestone in my life. So driving here, we used to live on Owens Road, which was the first house we ever lived in when I first came here as a 12-year-old. So we came through there, I drove past Auckland Grammar where I went to school. There was another house on King George Avenue that I drove past, the drive. So every house that I pretty much lived in Auckland. So in a way, sort of, it was a journey of my life, you know, just coming to this event. So in the time that my dad first initially came here for 6 years, he couldn't get a job in his field of work. So he's an electrical engineer. So when he first came here, you know, he just thought, oh, you know, just show up and somebody will just give a job. And you know, you see those ads in the paper and just say, come to New Zealand, beautiful, crime-free, everybody gets a job. Wasn't that easy. The hardest bit was getting his first job. And after he got his first job, he ended up being the chief engineer of the third largest company in New Zealand. And when I was at school, one of the things we had to do was do some extracurricular stuff. So I decided to do scuba diving and work in a rest home, and volunteer in a rest home. Initially thought I was going to end up becoming an engineer, but then liked it so much, ended up going to medical school. So came to medical school and got involved in policy. And ran for the New Zealand Medical Student Association board locally, won that, and got involved in policy making in New Zealand. At some point I got a prize in public health that led me to go and work at the World Health Organization in Switzerland, in Geneva. And one day got a call from Phil Goff and he said, look, we've heard about you. Would you be interested in coming and helping us out? And I said, sure. But I guess what I wanted to share with you was at different points in life, you know, like I've sort of been in your shoes. So initially, you know, when my dad came here, couldn't get a job for a long period of time, you know, finances were really short. There's a lot of things we couldn't afford. But, you know, I think the most important thing from that initial experience was that resilience is very important. And even now I see a lot of people, you know, I remember this one point where a couple of my friends used to live together. So there was about 8 of them. And they used to live in this house, and you know, and by that time, sort of, we were quite established, and you could just tell by just talking to the person who was going to go back and who was going to stay. And then there were other people who were like, well, look, I'm here to make sure that I make it, and most of those people have stayed back. So I think one thing is attitude is very important. That, you know, the attitude of resilience and making sure that, you know, no matter what, you are going to succeed. That is very important, because if you've given up here, then you're never going to make it. So one of the things I have realized is, you know, that it is important for us now as locals to give out again and connect with communities. And I think organizations like these are quite important. Way back when my dad came here, there weren't a lot of organizations like this. I know there used to be Auckland Migrant Services Trust, ARMS, which is still here, but there weren't too many organizations like this. So no matter what field it is, you know, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a doctor, whatever it is, you have to understand how that specific industry works, what are the deadlines, who are the key people to work with. So half the time, you know, it's all about just being at the right place at the right time. If you don't come to this center today, you're not going to be able to meet me, you're not going to be able to meet Raji or Gary, then, you know, that sort of takes you on a different path altogether. And for me, like, a lot of things that have happened in my life have all been about chance. And every time you applied for a job, they wanted you to have a 2 years experience to get your first job in New Zealand. So, you know, it's sort of the chicken and egg problem. How would you get the job if you don't have that? But now, you know, it's changed so much. People are accepting of migrants. There are so many businesses out there that will, you know, take your skills into consideration from overseas. And another thing I would say about New Zealand is often people like to meet in unofficial ways. So what I mean by that is, you know, less than coming to this sort of thing, maybe, you know, catching with somebody over coffee. I remember somebody who was looking for a job a few years ago in a hospital, and, you know, they tried many times and it had failed. And I said to them, well, you know, actually some of the decision makers from the hospitals are going to be at this event. Why don't you come and volunteer at this event? They came, they volunteered, and this person noticed that, you know, they were very active, passionate volunteer, and they got a job out of it. So, you know, people want to see that. And volunteering is, again, a big way of being able to connect with communities, of, you know, being able to get a job. Well, the most important thing to understand these days is, you know, that in a way, no job is secure. right? Like even a doctor's job is not secure because you've got artificial intelligence coming in. So I think it's important to understand that you've got to be flexible as well. And I think sometimes we ourselves box ourselves and say, well, I'm only going to be an accountant and do this, or I'm going to only do this. I was talking to a friend recently who used to be an accountant and then lost his job during COVID and became a stand-up comic. So people started going to his shows, and then often he would talk about his accounting jokes, because he was an accountant. And then some people came to him and said, hey, can you do my accounts? So he started doing one person's account, and second person's account, and third person's account, and now he's got a virtual accounting company that's done really well. And he's still doing stand-up comedy. But again, just adapting to things is quite important. And I think it's important also to make sure that you are always learning. It's like selling yourself, right? Like you're selling yourself for a job, you're selling yourself to 60,000 people in Hamilton who are going to vote for you. But at the end of the day, I think people do, as I said, they want to choose the best person for the job, whether it's being an MP, whether it's being a doctor. Like my doctor is an Indian, my doctor is well, he's Chinese, the last one was South African, so I don't go to him because I go, well, you're Chinese or you're South African. I just go to the best person for the job. And I think that's how you have to sell yourself. And another thing I would say is, I've hired quite a few people for my office, and it's not easy choosing people, and I think also important to understand that sometimes it's not you personally, like we all take it so personally when we don't get a job. We were hiring for a job where we had somebody who was a national level player, like they were playing for New Zealand, but they wanted a job for an assistant. We can't give you a job for an assistant. People often talk about being overqualified, but that is true. Sometimes you just really have to make sure that the person fits into that. So, I think it's important to understand that, it's not always you, but let not that sort of affect you and just move on from that.